When I was about 4 or 5 years old, we visited my aunt's house for the day. My aunt adored me and always made sure to spend quality time with me. Their house was separate from others and had a children's park nearby, which my aunt often took me to during the day. That night, as I slept beside my mother, my aunt quietly woke me up and led me by the hand to the park next to the house. It was late, perhaps around 3 a.m. She pushed me on the swing without saying a word. Despite my young age, something felt off. My usually lively aunt was silent and wore an expressionless face as she swung me. Afterwards, she silently guided me back to bed beside my mother. As a young child, I didn't question the strangeness of the situation too much. However, years later, I vividly remembered the event and knew it was no dream. When I asked my family about it, they insisted that it couldn't have been my aunt. Some suggested it might have been a jinn, a supernatural being that had taken a liking to me. While I'm uncertain about the jinn explanation, I can say with certainty that it was not my aunt. She wasn't prone to sleepwalking, and her behavior that night was unlike her usual self. Though tales of jinn are common in our area, I've never heard of one showing affection toward children. Perhaps it was not a jinn, but some other mysterious entity. Regardless, the experience remains a puzzle to me to this day. My son and I had a few weird, unexplainable encounters in a park in our town. We both would see a black woman walking around that was dressed oddly, as in what looked like something from centuries ago, and maybe even African. She was dressed in long robes, and her hair was up in a turban-like wrapping around her head. She'd always stare right into our eyes, but never say a word. She would just keep walking. I started researching the area because I felt she could be otherworldly. I got the vibe that she might have been a shaman or witch trapped in our dimension, but she looked as real as anyone. I found out that there was a cemetery directly beside the park where poor black families were buried sometime in the 1800s. I was talking to my son about the woman and what I found out about the cemetery. We were sitting in my SUV in the park. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a solid black doe leapt over the front of my SUV before running off in the direction of the cemetery. We looked at each other and I said, "No way, did you see that?" To which my son said that he did. This park is in the middle of the city, so not really near any forest or anything. So where did the deer come from? What could it mean? It felt related to the woman to me. When I was 10 years old, I witnessed something that still baffles me 6 years later. I was outside playing with my friends Nate and Donnie, enjoying our time together in our neighborhood. It's important to note that the area where I live has only one entrance and exit, meaning any vehicles entering must pass through this point. On this particular day, as we were walking, we saw an old-fashioned, completely white, double-decker bus driving down the road. We stopped in confusion because it seemed impossible for the bus to be there without entering through the entrance, which it didn't. Inside the bus, there were two individuals. The driver, a man dressed in 1920s style clothing, had snow-colored hair and pale, almost translucent skin. The most intriguing person, however, was a woman who resembled the driver in her complete whiteness. She was a passenger in the bus, and she waved at us. Despite the strangeness of the situation, they didn't seem threatening. Rather, they exuded warmth and benevolence. The whole encounter lasted only 5 seconds, but it left a lasting impression on me. As the bus passed by, it didn't fade away or drive off. It simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't now. I kept this experience to myself until recently, when I shared it with my mother. Unlike me, she believes in the supernatural. She recounted having a dream around the same time about her late mother, who passed away just before I was born. In the dream, her mother said she had to catch a bus. While I'm skeptical about the connection, I can't deny that what I saw that day was anything but normal. As a kid, I used to live in an old home in the suburbs of Perth, Western Australia. The home was built in 1939, and I believe it was war housing for vets after the Second World War. My parents bought the house in 2000. The original home was at the front of the house, which had small creaky wooden floorboards and high ceilings. It only had about 3 rooms. My room, my sister's room, and a playroom. And this part of the house was where a lot of the activity was centered. A hallway connected the old house to what was originally the backyard, but had been renovated to add a large modern wing onto the existing structure. My parents' room was in this wing. I lived there until I was about 12 years old, and my experience begins at around age 5 or 6. I started to hate sleeping in my room, and being in that part of the house in general. Every time I was there, I felt uneasy, even during broad daylight, and I had no idea why. Activity was usually focused in the toy room, the biggest room in that part of the house. Small things like toys moving, going missing, and turning on in the middle of the night when they were switched off hours prior. The first experience I had was when I was around 5. I had a vivid night terror of a dirt-covered black glove reaching out from under my pillow and attempting to grab me. When I told my parents, they seemed unbothered, although now I know this wasn't the case. This comes into play later. When I was around 7, I remember a Barbie keyboard my sister had. It turned on and played some sort of tune late at night. My sister woke me up as any kid would, and we both went and woke up our parents. When they heard what was happening, they were visibly on edge. This was not the first experience they had in that room. After some apprehension, my dad went in and turned the keyboard off. When he did that, the ceiling light wouldn't turn on. However, it worked in the morning. Another occasion involving toys happened in my room. I was around 8 years old. I had a 2008 Mummy's Gold Matchbox toy set. If anyone is unfamiliar with it, it's a battery-powered track which, once a Matchbox car runs over a button, or if the button is pushed, it activates a mummy's eyes to glow and a voice saying, "I have got you now." I was having trouble sleeping one night. I was wide awake, so I know this wasn't some hallucination. From the dead silence of night, I heard, "I've got you now." I jolted to look at the track. Its arms were moving up and down repeatedly. This was not a function the toy had. Its arms were only meant to move up and down once. After a few seconds, it stopped. I had been playing with it earlier, and I distinctly remember switching it off. I didn't sleep well that night, if I did at all. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room after this. I can recall multiple occasions in which a clock would fall off the wall, no matter where it was placed or what we used to hang it up. It fell off every time. The activity was fairly quiet for the remaining years we lived there. Basic spirit stuff like bangs, scratching noises, a cold breeze when there were no windows or doors open, dogs barking at doorways and corners when there's nothing there. We finally moved out in 2013. It was only years later when my parents told me about their experiences. They're now divorced, and they rarely agree on anything, except what happened in that house. They told me the toy room used to be my sister's room when she was a baby. Baby monitors recording sounds of a lullaby player, which had no batteries in it. Or it'd be put away in a closet, only to mysteriously reattach to the crib again. But by far the most disturbing account is that of a dark figure. Both my parents woke up in the dead of night, only to see a tall, dark figure, around 6 feet tall, wearing a trench coat, standing over them. The figure disappeared after a blink. My parents only saw him once. Just talking about it still makes them feel uneasy. The part that terrifies me is their account of the gloves. The figure over them wore the same gloves, the same black, dirty gloves that I had seen in my night terror as a child.